I've always liked hiking alone. Some people think it's risky, but for me, it's the only way to fully disconnect. No small talk, no noise except the wind, the birds, the crunch of your own boots on dry leaves. I've gone alone so many times I stopped telling people about it unless they specifically asked. I followed the safety stuff, left plans, carried maps, had a beacon, first aid, all that. This one hike started like any other. It was early October, and the leaves in Vermont were just past peak, which meant fewer people were on the trails. I picked a lesser-known loop through a section of national forest that I had only done once before, maybe 5 years earlier. I remembered it being beautiful, long stretches of tall trees, mossy rocks, and narrow trails that felt more like deer paths. I parked my car at a pull-off along a dirt road. There were no other cars there. The sky was clear, the air cool but not cold. I had enough layers in my pack, food for 2 days and all my gear. I didn't plan to camp, but I brought the emergency bivy sack in case I had to. About 2 hours in, I was cruising. I'd passed a beaver pond, a long patch of tall ferns, and a collapsed wooden bridge over a dry creek. Everything was dead quiet except for the natural stuff. No wind that day, just the kind of peaceful stillness that always calmed my nerves. The trail turned sharply and started climbing a steep ridge. I slowed down, adjusted my straps, and started the climb. I paused to catch my breath at a flat part halfway up. That's when I saw it. To my left, maybe 30 feet off the trail, a bright red shape stood out against the brown and green. First, I thought it was a person. My stomach jumped, but after a second, I realized it was just a red shirt, long-sleeved, faded but still bright, hanging from a low branch, not blowing in the wind, just hanging there limp. I stared at it for a bit. It was maybe 10 or 15 feet off the ground. Not impossible to reach, but not somewhere a shirt would just end up by accident. I stood there trying to figure it out. Could have been trash or some kid's lost gear. But it didn't look stuck. It looked placed. Curiosity got the better of me. I stepped off the trail and moved through the brush. The ground here was uneven, soft in some places, hard in others. The shirt didn't move as I got closer. It was tied at the sleeves in a way that looked deliberate. Old cotton, weathered but not shredded. I stopped just under the branch and looked around. That's when I noticed the ground had been disturbed. About 10 feet from where I stood, the forest floor was smoother, less covered in dead leaves. 2 rectangular patches of dirt looked freshly dug and then filled back in. The soil was darker there, looser. I walked toward them, cautiously, my eyes scanning the ground. They were about 6 feet long and maybe 2.5 feet wide each, both sunken slightly in the center. Looked like someone had dug deep, then refilled them. At the head of each was a simple, rounded stone with no writing on it. Looked like old granite, the kind that flakes at the edges from time and water. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to admit what I was thinking, but I couldn't stop the idea from forming. They looked like graves. I scanned the area more closely. A few feet beyond the 2 newer-looking mounds, I saw more stones, maybe 6 or 7, stuck in the ground at different angles. Some were nearly buried. Others leaned sideways. They were older, covered in lichen, edges cracked. I crouched by one and brushed away some moss. Underneath, faint letters were carved into the stone. A name unreadable, just a few lines. It wasn't a modern headstone. These were old, probably from the 1800s, maybe earlier, worn from years of weather. I stood up fast and looked around again. There were no trails near here, no cabins, no clearings, just woods. I pulled out my map and checked it, but there was nothing marked here. No cemetery, no historic site, no anything. I backed away and walked back to the red shirt, then back to the trail. My heart was racing a bit, not from fear exactly, just a deep unease. Something was wrong here. Someone had hung that shirt to mark something. It was bright enough to catch attention, but not close enough to a main path to be seen by accident. Whoever had placed it had meant for it to be found, but only by someone curious or someone who knew where to look. I hiked faster for the next few miles. The trail looped back around toward a dirt service road that would eventually lead near the parking area. I passed no one. I kept looking behind me, listening for footsteps or any movement in the woods, but it was dead silent. When I reached the car, I didn't take time to eat or change gear. I just tossed everything in the back and drove straight to the nearest ranger station, which was about 40 minutes away. I told them everything. No dramatic stuff, just facts. Red shirt, fresh graves, old headstones. They asked me to mark it on their map and write down my account. They said they'd send someone out. I got a call 2 days later. One of the rangers had gone out to the location with a sheriff's deputy. They confirmed the fresh graves. They found the shirt, the stones, everything I described. They even found tire tracks from an ATV nearby, faint but still there in a patch of soft dirt leading out deeper into the woods. The weirdest part? The headstones were real, but they weren't from that forest. They were from a small, historic graveyard about 30 miles away, near a tiny town I'd never heard of. The town had recently reported missing stones, a dozen or so. One had even vanished with part of the fencing it was set in. The ranger said it looked like someone had dug up the stones and moved them, but no one could figure out why. The soil samples from the 2 fresh graves were being tested, but there was no official word on whether they had anything in them. They were being treated as suspicious activity on public land. No arrests, no follow-up I ever heard about. After that, I stopped hiking alone for a while. I couldn't shake the image of those graves. The fact that someone took the time and effort to move stones that old into the middle of nowhere. It wasn't just vandalism. It was precise, planned, and I still think about that shirt. Why hang it there? To draw attention to the spot? To mock whoever might find it? Or to lure someone in the way I had been lured? I keep wondering if the graves were a warning or a message or something worse. I'll probably never know. What I do know is that the woods don't feel the same anymore. That trail, that forest, it's off my list for good. I still hike, but I stick to well-used trails now, places where I can see or hear other people. Because there are things out there that don't make sense. Not in the supernatural way. Not ghosts or monsters. Just things that regular people do, things that are real, deliberate, and deeply wrong. And sometimes the worst part is that no one ever finds out who did them or why. This happened about a year ago, and it changed how I feel about night hiking, even though I still go. It was just one of those nights that seemed like it would be fun, harmless. It turned into something that still lives in the back of my head, especially when I'm out in the dark now. We were in southern Arizona, one of those wide desert areas full of prickly pear, dry creek beds, and endless hills of rock and dust. The kind of place that glows orange at sunset and freezes by midnight. The plan that night was simple. Night hike with UV lights, look for scorpions. Nothing fancy, just something we'd done plenty of times before. There were 3 of us. I was in the back, caboose like we always called it. My 2 friends were up ahead, one leading, one in the middle. And we had a little dog with us, this 10-pound mutt with a bark bigger than its body. The dog was on a leash, bouncing from side to side, sniffing cactus pads and dry roots like it was on a mission. We hit the trail maybe 9:30 p.m. It wasn't a long one, just a few miles out and back, mostly flat with a few slight hills. The air was cool and dry, just a slight breeze. The kind of night where you don't hear much, just the crunch of boots, the whine of the wind over rocks, and the faint buzz of insects you can't see. We were all carrying small UV flashlights, the kind that make scorpions glow electric blue against the dirt. We were sweeping the sides of the trail as we walked. Found a few early on, tiny bark scorpions mostly, no bigger than a fingernail. The dog didn't notice them, but we made sure to keep it from getting too close when we saw one. About a mile in, the land started to slope a little. The trail curved through some scrub brush and a few saguaros. I wasn't really thinking of anything except the purple glow of the light and the occasional scorpion. It was calm, but then I turned around. I wasn't sure why I did, just instinct, maybe. I had this sudden itch at the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I stopped, turned, and swept my headlamp back across the trail behind us. That's when I saw something move. It was quick, just a dark shape, silent, leaping down from the edge of the trail into the scrub. I couldn't tell what it was at first. My brain wanted to say deer or coyote, but it didn't look right. Too smooth, too low to the ground. No sound at all. It just vanished into the dark between two spiny ocotillo plants. I froze for a second. My legs just locked up. Then I turned and picked up my pace to catch up to the others. I tried to stay calm. I kept glancing back every few seconds. I couldn't hear anything. Nothing at all. About 2 minutes later, I saw it again. This time it was closer, maybe 40 feet back. My headlamp swept past it, and for a half second I saw a curve of pale fur and a long, twitching tail just above the scrub. It was moving along with us, silent, smooth, low to the ground, and then it dipped down again and disappeared. I stopped dead. I just stood there, breathing hard, trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined it. But I knew what I'd seen. I picked up my pace again, faster this time, and caught up to the middle hiker. They glanced at me, confused, and I pointed back at the trail. I didn't say anything, just used my hand to signal, "Watch out." A second later, the beam of my headlamp caught movement again. This time, the middle hiker saw it too. It was a big cat, definitely a mountain lion. It didn't make a sound. It was staying just out of reach of the light, but close enough to track us. We couldn't see its eyes yet, just the body, low, thick, all muscle. It moved with this slow, deliberate crawl, almost like it was floating over the ground. I've seen videos before, but nothing prepares you for seeing one in real life, especially when it's tracking you. We picked up the pace. The dog still hadn't noticed, which was probably a good thing. If it had started barking, I think the cat might have reacted. As it just kept stalking us. Not charging, not retreating, just following. The trail was only about a quarter mile from the trailhead now, but that quarter mile felt like it stretched forever. The path wound between rocks and cactus and small gullies. I kept turning every few seconds, walking backwards with my light locked on the scrub behind us. Each time I turned, I caught another glimpse. The lion kept moving when we moved. It stayed low and silent, weaving in and out of the brush like it had all the time in the world. At one point, I thought it was gone. I stopped walking backwards for maybe 20 seconds. Then I saw the tail again, just flicking in the dark, maybe 20 feet behind us now. It had gotten closer. We reached the parking area finally, a small dirt lot with a few scattered cars. Most of them were empty, except one. There was a beat-up sedan parked crooked near the edge of the lot, engine off, but windows slightly fogged. One of my friends walked up to the driver's side and tapped the window. There was a pause, then the window cracked open. The driver turned on the engine. The headlights came on, flooding the brush with bright white light. That's when we saw it fully, finally. The mountain lion was about 20 feet off to the right, crouched behind a creosote bush. When the headlights hit it, it didn't move at first. It just stared. It had this solid body, shoulders like a dog but twice as wide. Thick paws, tail curled like a whip. Its eyes reflected back green and glassy. It had been waiting, probably for the dog. As soon as it realized it had been completely seen, it took off. Not in a panic, just fast, controlled, like it had been through this before. It vanished into the darkness beyond the parking lot. Just gone. We stood there for a while, not talking. The dog still hadn't barked. The engine idled. The driver didn't ask any questions. He must have seen it too. No one wanted to say anything stupid. Eventually, we got in the car and left. Since that night, I haven't stopped hiking. I still go out, even at night sometimes. But I think differently now. I walk slower. I check behind me more. I don't go off trail. And I never, ever forget that even when you don't see anything, something might still be watching you. That mountain lion wasn't acting strange. It was doing what predators do. Probably saw the little dog first. Easy prey. But we were there too, so it followed, waiting for a moment when one of us slipped up. The part that stuck with me wasn't just that it followed us. It was how calm and patient it was. No growling, no lunging, just a steady, careful stalk like it had done this before. It didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. It didn't need to show its teeth. It just had to wait. Now, every time I'm out there, I think about what else might be watching from the edge of the trail. And even when everything feels safe, I keep one eye on the dark. Because sometimes it's not about what you hear. It's about what you don't. I learned that early mornings in Hawaii can be beautiful. A soft light over the ocean, birds calling, the smell of earth and blooming flowers. I've always loved hiking before dawn, when the air is pure and the trail is just mine. But that morning taught me something else. Certain things can turn a peaceful walk into a nightmare, especially when a banana spider shows up. I woke before sunrise, just enough time to grab my gear, strap on my pack, and meet my friend at the trailhead. We planned a short hike up a ridge trail that overlooked the coastline. We didn't plan it as a sunrise hike, but we hoped to hit the summit before the sun peaked above the waves. My stomach, though, had its own plan. About 20 minutes into the hike, halfway through loose lava rock and creeping ferns, I got a feeling, like the body's own alarm clock. My stomach tightened, low and insistent. The first warning came as a shift in my gut, a physical nudge. The second got louder, a more urgent reminder. It was time. Couldn't ignore it. The trail had no view sites set up for emergencies, and the thought of finding a bush or a rock was less appealing than at least hoping for a porta potty. I remembered seeing one at the trailhead parking area when I parked. I didn't want to turn around, but I didn't have a choice. That thing in my gut wasn't going to let up. I quickened my pace back down the trail, careful on the loose rock, mindful that it was still dark. I checked my headlamp, replaced the batteries the night before, and flicked it on. The beam bounced over the trail ahead, revealing mossy roots and rocky footprints. Birds stirred, and insects buzzed faintly. With every step, I wondered if I could hold it just a little longer. But every 10 feet made me more desperate. I kept walking faster, adrenaline pushing me down the trail as the sky lightened. The porta potty stood at the edge of the parking area, offset from the cars, near a cluster of trees. The kind that hikers and campers use, the plastic kind, painted faded green with mildew stains near the bottom. I hurried toward it, all sense of time collapsing into urgency. I swung the door open, slammed inside, and shut it behind me. The smell hit me in waves, cleaning solution mixed with old waste and that humid, tropical air. I braced on the wooden shelf inside, hurried through my business with thanks pouring from every muscle in relief. I could feel my shirt damp against my back from sweat, my feet sore from the hike, my clothes stiff. But I wasn't thinking of any of that. My entire focus was on the relief I felt when I finished. I reached behind me for the toilet paper, reflex, and switched my headlamp on. Bright light pierced the dim interior. I turned toward the back corner of the stall to find the paper dispenser, only to be met with something else. Something large, hairy, unmistakable, and horrifying. A banana spider, roughly 5 inches across body to leg span, clinging to the corner of the wall, its legs splayed in a starburst shape. My heart froze. The spider was huge. Its body alone was nearly 2 inches long, with legs that stretched out wide into a chaotic tangle. The colors were wild. Black bands, vibrant yellow, orange hints on the legs, the body shaped like a glossy orb. It looked as real as anything could look in that lonely corner of a porta potty. My mind blanked for a moment. I was supposed to be smooth, but my hands trembled when I reached for the toilet paper. The headlamp flicked, caught the spider's legs, and it jerked violently, as if slapped. Its legs moved faster, kicking and dancing in the light. Everything changed in that instant. The spider freaked out. It lost whatever calm it had. The legs pumped, tapping the plastic walls so fast I could hear the rapid beat. Nearly 5 inches across, yet agile, sharp, hands flying as if it tried to burrow into the wall, into my skin, into that small space nothing could escape. I screamed without thinking. Adrenaline flooded me, hands shaking, vision blurred at the edges. The spider accelerated, legs spinning, like frantic fans pumping air. Then it leaped. In a fluid motion that felt like gravity and fate all at once, it dropped. Against the light I'd been aiming, it landed with a thud inside my underwear, against my thigh. I froze, breath throttled, brain frying. My hands froze on the toilet paper. My mind couldn't go anywhere faster than immediate panic. The spider had vanished into darkness, inside my shorts. I stayed still for a second. My heart pounded a stampede in my chest. I dared not think, because if I thought, I imagined pulling the clothes down and seeing a huge spider inches from my skin. I couldn't face that until something happened. But the spider moved again, feet scrabbling at fabric inside my underwear, and I could feel the movement, faint but undeniable, like tiny tickles of doom. I knew I had to get out. Anything else would be worse. But I couldn't just yank off my pants there. Or could I? I tried to think, but the spider made noise inside me. An internal scampering that felt like it crawled straight into my nerve endings. In that moment, I did something stupid. I thought the motions of my body might disturb it into dropping out. So I started wiggling, back and forth. A few quick body shakes. The spider paused, one moment of stillness. My heart soared. I hoped the idea worked. My brain waited, or hoped it did. Then it reacted, feet scrambling again, faster this time, racing up my side, not down. In two swift shakes, the creature burst forth from the waistband line and slipped down the side of my leg. My body jolted. Another scream, words I can't remember, but I stumbled against the porta-potty wall with pants at my ankles. I mashed the door open, legs pumping as I ran full speed away, dragging my pants, screaming in terror, humiliation, rush, release. I didn't even look back. I just ran. I tore to the parking lot opening, still shrieking, clothes trailing like fall leaves. My friend was there, flashlight trained on the stall, face pale but eyes wide. They didn't say anything, they didn't need to. I spouted out sprightly, wordless sound, arms flapping. We both stared at the stall. The spider was gone. No sticky silk, no sign, nothing. I backed away, shaking, eyes glancing over every inch of dirt, asphalt, tree roots. My breath came in ragged gasps. Adrenaline crashed into shame. My underwear soiled, my pack thrown to the ground. My dignity trampled inside that stall with my pants down. We stood there for a moment, maybe 5 seconds, maybe 5 minutes. There was no calm afterwards. Just a spray of shock and silence and trying to piece together what happened. The spider, huge, metallic, gone. Me pantless, spooked. In the end, we agreed, we left. We packed our gear. We headed off the trailhead. I fumbled both the zipper and zipper on the car. We parked right in front of that stall. I dumped my bag on the passenger seat and changed behind the wheel, slapping wipes on raw skin where the spider had touched. I tossed the offending underwear into a trash bin with a final heavy chuck. We didn't talk about scorpions or spiders on the hike. Later, I researched them. Banana spiders, golden silk orb weaver, common in Hawaiian forests and brush. Venom mild to humans, but bite is sharp. Their webs are huge, hard to see, big enough to catch birds. The spiders aren't hunters, they wait. The stall must have offered a corner of dark shelter, and the torch abruptly woke it. Panicked inside my underwear. So the ending. Daylight came. I chose to leave the trail out of embarrassment and fear. I went home. I vowed that next time I'll check the stall before stepping in. I'll shine my light on the ceiling, the walls, the piping. And maybe I won't trust that convenience in the morning. Since then, I still hike. But now I approach porta potties at night with the wariness I reserve for unfamiliar wildlife. I carry wipes and a spray bottle with repellent. I scan crevices, and I keep my headlamp trained high before stepping in. My morning routine now includes a spider check. I'll never step into a dark stall the same way again, because now I know creatures thrive in corners you don't think about. And sometimes, when you least expect it, they'll fall into your underwear. That was the worst part. The sheer surprise, that spider going inside me, running free, scared me more than any predator in a forest. Because it wasn't a fight, it was an invasion of personal space, a violation. It shattered my calm world. That morning hike ended with the sunrise still beautiful but tinged with fear. I skipped the main trail, raced to the car, and drove away. And I realized something about life in the wild. It's not always predators in the grass. Sometimes the wild snagged you in the bathroom when you thought you were safe. And that is what I carry with me now. Respect for how fast calm can flip to chaos, especially in the corners you don't see. But I still hike, And every hike I'm grateful for that lesson, because I survived, and now I'm wiser. I've done a lot of backpacking trips over the years, but the one that happened in the Sierra Mountains in California in late August still sticks with me like nothing else. We had all planned for it months in advance. 5 of us, all friends from college and scattered across different parts of the state now. It had been a while since we'd all gotten together, and we figured a 5-day trip through the Sierra backcountry would be a good way to reconnect. The trailhead we chose wasn't one of the most popular ones, which meant fewer people and more untouched wilderness. We had maps, a planned route, and permits. We were all in decent shape and had done this kind of thing before, though maybe not this deep into the wild. Still, we felt confident. The drive to the trailhead was long, winding roads, thick trees, long stretches of nothing but mountains. We parked, locked the cars, and shouldered our packs. There was always that first moment when you cross the boundary from regular life into the woods, when the cell signal dies and the only things ahead of you are pine needles, granite, and whatever the wild decides to throw your way. The first 2 days were pretty much what you'd expect from a trip like this. We hiked 10 to 15 miles each day, gaining elevation slowly. The trails were narrow, sometimes slick with loose gravel. Tall pines gave us shade, and the higher we got, the more the trees opened into long ridges where we could see for miles, just more peaks and valleys stretching into the haze. Sometimes we passed deer. Once we saw a rattlesnake coiled near a sun-warmed boulder. We gave it space and moved on. Nights were cold, as they usually are at higher elevations. We camped near creeks where we filtered our water and pitched our tents in a loose circle. Everyone had their own tent except me and Chris, who shared a 2-man setup. At night, we'd sit around a small fire, talking, boiling water for food, laughing about dumb stories from college. Each night before bed, we followed the same routine. All food, toothpaste, deodorant, sunscreen, or anything else with a scent went into the bear bag. The bear bag was a heavy-duty dry sack we hung from a tree branch far from camp, at least 10 to 15 feet off the ground and 4 feet from the trunk, to keep it out of reach from curious bears. Chris was the kind of guy who was fun to hike with, tough, good stamina, but also not the most careful. He was always the last one to filter his water, the last one to repack his gear, and he sometimes left wrappers in his pockets until someone reminded him. I think he meant well, but he just didn't take this kind of stuff seriously sometimes. By the 3rd night, we had reached a small, flat area between 2 ridges that sloped steeply into forest. There was a good water source nearby, fast-moving and clean, and we set up our camp with plenty of space between tents. That evening, we watched the sun go down over the western ridge and boiled water for dinner. The wind carried the scent of pine and the sharp cold that hinted at an even colder night ahead. I remember crawling into my sleeping bag around 10 p.m. My muscles were sore in a good way. I had that comfortable kind of exhaustion that comes from a full day of effort. I fell asleep fast. I woke up a little after 2 a.m. at the sound of shouting. It was sudden and panicked. I was so deep in sleep that it took me a few seconds to realize it wasn't part of a dream. My heart was already racing by the time I unzipped the tent. The yelling came from the other side of camp. I scrambled out in my thermal layer and socks, not even bothering with boots. The moon was bright enough to see shapes, but I could hear before I could see. A low, heavy huffing sound and a lot of movement. My eyes adjusted, and I saw Chris's tent was shaking violently. The entire structure was being flattened and then partially rising over and over. That's when I saw it. A massive black shape crouched over the tent, shifting weight, pawing at the collapsed nylon. It took my brain a second to process what I was seeing, but once it clicked, I felt my blood go cold. A bear, a big one, a black bear, probably 250 pounds, maybe more. It was right on top of him. The rest of the group was stumbling out of their tents. No one had a flashlight at first, just the moon and the stars and the chaotic sound of nylon tearing. Chris was yelling inside the tent, his voice muffled and frantic. The bear was clawing at something inside, tearing into the fabric. I didn't think. I just grabbed the closest thing near our fire pit, a small aluminum cooking pot, and slammed it against a rock. The metallic ringing split the air. The others followed suit. One guy had a hiking pole and started banging it against a tree. Another threw a rock that landed a few feet from the bear. The bear stopped moving for a second and looked up. Its face was broad and dark, and its nose twitched as it sniffed. Then it went right back to tearing at the tent. We kept at it. More rocks, more banging. I yelled, not words, just sound, loud and sharp. Finally, one of the rocks hit the bear near its back leg. It let out a sharp grunt and pulled back, moving off the tent, then turning to lope away, crashing into the trees. Everything went quiet except for Chris groaning from inside what was left of the tent. We rushed over. The tent was destroyed, ripped open like a sardine can. Chris was curled on his side in his sleeping bag, which had been torn near the feet. His bare leg was bleeding from a long, shallow claw mark. He looked stunned more than anything. We got him out, patched the scratch with the first aid kit, and moved him to another tent. He kept muttering that he was fine. I helped him sit up and took a look around the shredded tent. There, near where his head had been, was a tube of toothpaste. Unopened, still sealed. He must have had it in a side pocket of the tent, forgotten when we packed the bear bag that night. That little oversight almost got him killed. None of us went back to sleep that night. We sat around the fire pit, keeping it going even though we hadn't planned to burn wood at night. Everyone kept looking toward the tree line, half expecting to see the bear come back. Chris sat wrapped in a sleeping bag, shivering a little. I don't think he said a word the rest of the night. When the sun came up, we packed up camp in silence. Chris was still able to walk, but we decided to cut the trip short. There was a ranger station about 16 miles away, near a different trailhead. We rerouted there. As we hiked, we kept stopping and looking behind us. Every crack of a branch made us jump. The woods didn't feel like the same place anymore. It felt more alive, more watchful. The line between us and the wild felt thinner than it had before. We made it out by early evening the next day. At the ranger station, we reported the incident. They asked about injuries, asked where it happened, and thanked us. They said there had been an increase in bear activity lately, people being careless with food, bears getting bolder. Once a bear gets food from a tent or backpack, it learns fast. That's when they become a real danger. Chris didn't say much on the drive home. He cleaned up the scratch at a clinic later. It didn't need stitches, but it left a scar. The rest of us took longer to recover in a different way. We talked about it for weeks afterward, how close it had been, how fast it happened, how none of us were really prepared for something that real. I think about it a lot, especially at night in the woods. I've gone backpacking since, but I double and triple check my bear bag now. I go further from camp to hang it. I use odor-proof bags. I lecture my friends even if it annoys them, because it's not just food that attracts bears. It smells. Tiny things like toothpaste or lip balm or even wrappers. Things you don't think of until it's too late. Chris and I don't talk much now. Not because we're angry, but because I think that night changed something. For him, maybe it's a reminder he'd rather forget. For me, it's a reminder I'll never let go of. Out there, you're a visitor. And if you forget that, even just for one night, the wild has a way of reminding you. Not with a warning, but with claws and weight and breath so close you can feel it on your face. I've done a lot of hiking in Southeast Asia. The jungles there are thick and steaming and alive in a way that's hard to explain unless you've been inside them. Sarawak on the island of Borneo has some of the best rainforest in the world. Deep, ancient forest that never really stops breathing, where the trees grow so tall and tight they block out the sun, and the ground never truly dries out. I was in my late 20s when I went on a long trip to Borneo. I had saved up enough money and planned to spend a few weeks hiking and camping through different parts of the jungle, including a few protected parks. The main one I'd been looking forward to was in Sarawak, a national park famous for its orangutan population. It's not a zoo, not some controlled sanctuary. It's raw, open space where these massive primates live free. There are boardwalks and trails and marked paths, but once you're deep inside, it's real jungle. We weren't supposed to see them up close. Not really. Maybe you'd catch a glimpse in the trees or hear the branches shifting high above if you were lucky. But they usually stayed far away, deep in the foliage where no one could follow, especially the alpha males. They were like ghosts, massive, powerful, rarely seen. But one day we saw one, and it wasn't just a sighting. It was a moment that has never left me. I joined a small hiking group with a local guide who was familiar with the area. There were 6 of us, including me, a couple from Europe, 2 women from Australia, and a quiet guy from Canada who barely spoke. We were all fit, respectful, and careful. No one was making noise or trying to feed animals or any of that idiotic behavior you sometimes see from tourists. It was day 4 of our hike when it happened. We had made our way into a quieter part of the park, far from the main foot traffic. It had rained the night before, so everything was soaked and smelled like soil and rot, the kind of humid heat that crawls into your lungs and never leaves. We were walking single file along a muddy trail when our guide stopped suddenly and raised his hand. We all froze. He didn't say anything, just stood there, listening. Then he slowly stepped off the trail and pointed toward the trees on our left. At first, I couldn't see anything, just vines and leaves and more green. Then I heard it, branches creaking, knots swaying in the wind, bending, cracking, like something heavy was moving through them. We waited, and then out of the trees he appeared, an adult male orangutan, not just any male. This one had the full cheek pads, what locals call flanges, round, wide, fleshy growths on both sides of the face that marked him as dominant. His fur was a deep, dirty orange, matted in places, darker along the shoulders and back. His arms were as long as he was tall, and his hands looked like they could crush skulls without much effort. His face was massive and calm and unreadable. He didn't make a sound. He just stepped onto the trail like he owned it. And he did. He stopped in the middle of the path and stood there, chest rising and falling slowly, looking around. He didn't move like a man or an ape you'd see in a zoo. He moved like something ancient, heavy, measured, presence, like gravity had shifted, and we were all just stuck in orbit around him. We didn't move. No one even breathed loud. He was maybe 20 feet from us, closer than you ever want to be to something that's strong in the wild. He looked toward us once, just for a second. His eyes passed over us like searchlights. I remember feeling my knees go soft when he looked my way. I wasn't afraid like you get afraid when you hear a noise in the dark. I was afraid the way a rabbit might feel when it realizes it's being watched by a predator. Because that's what he was. He wasn't out to kill us. He wasn't on a rampage. He just didn't care about us at all. And if anything we did annoyed him or made him feel threatened, we'd be finished before we had time to yell. He stood there for what felt like forever. None of us dared raise a camera. No one reached for anything. We just stood still like stones. I don't know what made him come out of the trees that day. Some say they wander to check territory. Others think it's curiosity. But alpha males don't show themselves unless they want to. And when they do, they control the space around them. He sniffed the air. Then he walked forward. Not toward us, but across the trail. Slow, with that rolling shoulder movement that orangutans have, half on 2 legs, half on all 4s. He moved with total confidence. He stepped past a tree, turned his back to us, and slipped into the brush. We didn't move for another full minute. We just stood there, still processing what we'd seen. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Finally, the guide motioned for us to keep walking. We didn't talk about it. None of us wanted to. There was something about the encounter that felt personal, like we'd been allowed to see something rare and dangerous. But it had a weight to it, like we'd almost crossed a line without knowing it. I thought that would be it. The moment. The one thing I'd never forget from the trip. But it wasn't the end. We camped that night in a clearing with a nearby stream. We set up hammocks and mosquito nets and ate in silence. The jungle was alive around us with noise. Cicadas, frogs, birds calling in the distance. But none of us talked about the orangutan. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. At first, I didn't know why. I just opened my eyes and felt wrong, like something was off. The jungle noise had shifted. It was quieter, not silent, but the balance had changed. Less movement, less chirping. Something had passed through. I lay there in my hammock, barely breathing. My net was drawn tight, but I could still see shapes and movement through the mesh. Then I heard it, a soft cracking sound, like wood under pressure. Not close, But not far either. Came again. Something large moving slowly. Not like a pig. Not like a deer. Then the breathing. Deep and low and slow. Like someone sleeping, but bigger. Heavier. The shape moved behind a tree near the edge of the clearing. It was upright, but hunched. Massive. I couldn't see clearly, but I knew what it was. He'd followed us. Or maybe we'd stayed too close to his territory. He didn't make a sound besides the breathing and the occasional shift of weight. He was just there, watching, maybe smelling us. I lay there with my hands clenched into fists under the net, not moving a muscle. He stayed for 10 minutes. Then the noise faded. The breathing moved away. The jungle sounds slowly returned. In the morning, no one else mentioned anything. Maybe no one else had woken up. Or maybe they just didn't want to talk about it. But I saw footprints. Deep, round prints in the soft earth near the trees. Not far from our camp. Too wide to be human. Too flat to be anything else. The guide saw them too. He didn't say anything, just looked at them, then looked at me. That day, we cut the hike short. We returned to the nearest ranger post and got picked up early. Back in the small lodge on the edge of the park, I read more about orangutans. The alpha males, especially the dominant ones, control large territories. They move alone and can travel several kilometers in a single night. They remember faces. They remember smells. They also kill. Not humans, not often, but other orangutans, rivals, intruders, and sometimes they lash out without warning. There are stories, quiet ones, unconfirmed ones. A researcher in another part of Borneo who disappeared one morning, never found. A guide who was mauled after stumbling onto a nest. A tourist scratched open after trying to approach a juvenile. It doesn't take much. I've seen bears. I've seen lions, leopards, snakes. But I've never felt that kind of stillness before. That absolute power wrapped in silence. He didn't have to growl or show teeth or charge. He just had to look. And I still think about what might have happened if someone in our group had raised a camera, or stepped back too quickly, or made noise in their hammock that night. He wasn't there to play games. He wasn't curious. He was watching. And if he'd seen something he didn't like, it would have been over for all of us. I grew up in the suburbs of Cape Town, South Africa. My parents weren't exactly what you'd call outdoorsy, but we had our routines, weekend hikes, a few family camping trips here and there, mostly in well-managed parks with electricity and showers and little fences to keep things out, safe places. But once, when I was around 10, we went on a longer camping trip through Botswana. My mother had always wanted to see the big wildlife. Not just from the car like on game drives, but something real, something close. So we took 2 weeks off, packed up an old 4x4, and drove deep into Botswana, camping in some pretty remote places. I still remember that trip like it was yesterday. We spent our nights in basic campgrounds, mostly clearings near watering holes or riverbeds, nothing fancy. There'd usually be a pit toilet or a concrete ablution block, maybe a water tank if you were lucky. No fences. No guards, just you and whatever was out there. I didn't understand how exposed we were until later. It was one of the last days of our trip, and we were camped near a dry riverbed that cut through scrubby hills. There were no other people for kilometers, just mopane trees, dusty roads, and thick bush that swallowed the sounds of our voices. The sun baked the ground until it cracked. At night, the stars came out so bright they looked like they were burning holes in the sky. I remember I needed to use the bathroom just before we were about to leave that morning. I told my mom I was heading to the ablution block, a squat, faded concrete building that stood maybe 40 meters from our tents. It had a tin door and a swinging latch that didn't always stay shut, and the inside smelled like old water and cracked soap. Still, it had a proper toilet and a working tap, so I used it. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes. When I stepped outside again, everything looked the same. Dry, empty, silent. But then I saw it. A massive baboon was sitting just off to the side of the entrance, half in the shade of the building, half in the sun. It was bigger than any baboon I'd seen on TV or in the nature books I had back home. I remember the shoulders, wide like a man's, but with thick, corded muscle under that patchy fur. Its face was long and dark and wrinkled, with eyes that looked like they could read thoughts. Its mouth was slightly open, showing long yellow canines, longer than my fingers. It didn't move. It didn't need to. I froze. I wasn't even 10 meters away from it. It had seen me, no question, and it wasn't flinching. It just sat there, like it was waiting for something. Its hands rested on the dirt. The fingers looked like burnt branches. The arms alone looked strong enough to bend steel. The thing was massive. I turned and stepped quietly back into the bathroom and shut the door. There was no lock, not really. Just a hook latch which I slid into place with a trembling hand. I backed away from the door and sat on the concrete edge of the wall, my legs shaking. I had no plan. I just knew I didn't want to walk past it. I remembered what I'd heard, that baboons can kill dogs, even fend off leopards when they have to. I had no idea what made one of them decide to attack. I didn't know if I'd done something wrong just by being near it, but I wasn't going out. I waited. Time passed slowly. I could hear birds, insects. The tap dripped. After a while, I heard footsteps. My mom. She knocked and pushed the door open with her foot, thinking I was done. She saw my face and raised her eyebrows. I pointed outside and whispered, even though I didn't need to. The baboon was gone. But I never forgot that moment, that size, that silence. Years passed. I moved away. I finished school. I went to university. I traveled when I could. But that memory stuck with me, more than lions or snakes or any of the other dangerous animals in Africa. The baboon wasn't part of the dangerous big five people talked about, but it was the only animal I ever saw that made me feel small in a very human way. Later, when I was in my 20s, I went hiking again, this time back in Botswana, older, with a few friends. We planned a long route that would take us through some game reserves. Not tourist-heavy spots, but wild, open trails. We carried everything we needed: tents, food, water filters, first aid kits. One of the guys had grown up in Zambia and had done survival training. He knew the basics, what to look for, what to avoid. For most of the hike, everything went smoothly. We saw elephants at a distance, a few antelope near the water, some hyena prints in the mud, but no big encounters. Until day 6, we had camped near a rocky hill where the bush opened into grassland. There was a watering hole maybe 200 meters out, and we figured it was safe enough to camp there if we didn't cook meat or leave food out. The night was calm. In the morning, we woke up early, had a cold breakfast, packed up our gear. I walked a short way from camp to relieve myself in the bushes and noticed that the area smelled different. Not bad, just stronger, musky, wild. I saw some scat nearby that didn't look like hyena or leopard. Larger, more human-looking, baboons. I called the others and we checked the area. Nothing nearby, so we pushed on. An hour later, we came around a dry bend in the trail and froze. A troop of baboons. Not just a few. Dozens. They were spread across the path and in the trees, young ones leaping between branches, females carrying babies on their backs, and several huge males scattered through the middle of the group. They saw us immediately. We stopped. We weren't close, maybe 30 meters out, but we knew better than to move fast or make noise. We stayed still, just watching. Then one of the males started walking toward us. Not fast, not charging. Just this slow, deliberate walk like he had all the time in the world. He was massive. His arms hung low, his shoulders wide. His face was half covered in old scars, one eye cloudy. He was ancient and powerful and clearly not afraid of anything. We stayed still. He walked until he was maybe 10 meters from us, then stopped and stared. I could hear his breathing, deep, steady. His hands flexed slightly. His chest was huge. He could have broken us in half. We didn't move. The others in the troop watched too. Silent. No barking. No screaming. Just this strange tension like something was about to happen but hadn't yet. After maybe 30 seconds, though it felt like hours, the big male turned around and walked back toward his troop. No rush. One by one, they followed him. They moved off the path, down a slope, into the brush. We waited a long time before we moved again. When we finally passed through that section, I saw something in the dirt. A torn piece of fabric. Looked like part of a sleeve. Faded blue. A button still attached. It was old, maybe trash, maybe from another hiker. But I kept thinking about how close we'd just come to being part of something worse. That night, we didn't sleep well. Every sound in the dark felt closer, louder. We didn't speak. I think we were all thinking the same thing. How helpless we had been. How the biggest baboon had looked at us like we were beneath him. Like he knew he didn't need to be scared. That no matter what gear we carried or what stories we told ourselves about being prepared, out there we were weak. We finished the hike 2 days later without any more sightings. But that moment stayed with me. Years later, I talked to a wildlife biologist who'd studied baboons. He told me what I already knew. The big males, the really old ones, were apex fighters. They knew how to break bones, how to intimidate, how to read a threat and act with surgical violence when needed. A lone baboon might not be as big as a lion, but in the right setting, it was worse. Because it could think, could watch, could wait. I never told my mom what really happened on that trip when I was 10. How scared I was. How long I stayed locked in that concrete bathroom. She always told me they were more scared of us than we were of them. But I knew better, because I saw one up close. I saw the strength, the silence, the absolute lack of fear. And I'll never forget how small I felt when it looked at me. I grew up in the US, mostly hiking in forests, deserts, and the kind of mountains where the worst thing I usually ran into was a snake or a very distant black bear. My understanding of wilderness was mostly shaped by those experiences. Big skies, pine trees, and keeping your food away from raccoons. But Africa was different. The trip wasn't meant to be anything crazy. It was supposed to be a 2-week hiking and camping loop through a park in southern Africa. I had friends who lived there, 2 of them born and raised in the region, and they'd invited me to join them on something they'd done many times before. It was just them and me, no guides, no group. We'd carry our own packs, sleep under the stars, and stay away from tourist-heavy areas. That was the plan. And for the first few days, that's exactly what it was. Quiet trails, big skies, dry valleys with grass like straw, thick brush that rustled in the wind, and long, hot days under the sun. At night, the stars looked bigger than I'd ever seen them. You could hear crickets, hyenas in the distance, and sometimes the slow, deep cough of a leopard. But that was far away. They never came close. We didn't see many other people. The odd cattle herder far off or a pair of hikers at a distance. But mostly it felt like we had the whole land to ourselves. It was peaceful. Not easy, some of the terrain was brutal, but peaceful. We ran into the baboons on the 4th morning. We were just outside a rocky gorge, not far from a dry riverbed. It was the kind of place where trees leaned sideways and the sand was marked with animal prints that blurred under the breeze. I noticed some tracks that morning, paw prints and scuffed marks that looked like dragging. I mentioned it to one of my friends. He looked at them and shrugged, said baboons probably moved through at dawn. That didn't bother me. I'd seen baboons on safari once. Loud, jumpy things that moved in groups and scattered when jeeps pulled up. I didn't think much of them. If anything, I figured we'd see them up high in the cliffs or hear them rustling through brush. But what happened was different. We were crossing a shallow slope with scrub brush and loose stones. The sun was already high and the light made everything feel flat and washed out. I remember being thirsty, checking my water, and thinking how slow the morning was. Then one of my friends stopped walking and raised his arm. I followed his gaze. There were baboons ahead of us. A troop, maybe 10 or 12, mostly sitting, some grooming, a couple of younger ones chasing each other through the low branches. It was quiet, too quiet for that many animals. They weren't yelling or barking like I expected. They weren't posturing. They were just still. That's when I noticed how big they were. The males especially, thick-chested, with arms like ropes and long dog-like faces. Their canines were clearly visible even when their mouths were closed. One of them was sitting on a rock, not 20 yards away, staring straight at us. His face was scarred. His tail twitched once or twice, but otherwise he didn't move. My friends weren't panicking, but they weren't relaxed either. I could tell they were assessing the situation. Slowly, we began to move off the trail, giving the baboons a wide berth. We moved slow, deliberate, No sudden movements. That was the rule. But it didn't work. The big one stood up. His chest looked almost as wide as a person's. Then a second one stood. A female started to hoot, and two younger ones dropped from a tree like they were ready to move. We froze. I pulled my can of mace out of the side pouch of my bag. I had bought it before the trip, thinking it would be enough for snakes or maybe a curious predator. I figured it might work here too. Loud sound, bad smell, burning sensation. Animals hated that stuff, right? I had no idea what I was doing. The baboons began to move forward. Not charging, not aggressive, just this slow, sure walk like they were checking us out, seeing if we had anything they wanted. They weren't afraid. One of them cut left, the other right. The big one came straight. That slow stride, tail curled. His hands were huge, bigger than I thought a baboon's hands could be. He walked like a man in the desert, casual but focused. I sprayed. It hit him in the face directly. Full contact. Bright orange burst, strong stream. He stopped for a second, blinked, then he kept coming. No change, no flinch, no coughing, just a pause like he was processing it, and then he was walking again, faster now. My friends shouted and started waving their packs. One of them threw a rock that hit the ground near the baboon's feet. That finally made him slow down. Not stop, not turn, just slow. But that spray did nothing. He circled around us once and then stepped back toward the troop. The younger ones hooted once and leaped through the brush. One grabbed a wrapper from my pack that had fallen to the ground and tore it open. Another climbed halfway up a tree, then dropped down again. We started backing out. It wasn't clean. I was stumbling. My hands were shaking. I kept the spray in front of me, but deep down I already knew it wouldn't do anything. The biggest one had taken a direct hit and hadn't even sneezed. I'd read about pepper spray being used on bears, on dogs. It was supposed to buy you time. But this wasn't a bear. It wasn't even a dog. It was something that understood what it was doing. When we finally got clear of the troop, maybe a quarter mile out, we didn't stop. We hiked until our legs hurt, until we hit an area with more open space and rocky slopes where we could see everything around us. Only then did we rest. One of my friends pulled out a field knife and just kept it in his lap while we ate. Nobody said anything for a long time. I felt stupid, not just scared, stupid, because I had actually believed that a can of mace would protect us, that something made for people in cities could do anything to a wild animal used to pain, to fights, to survival in places harsher than anything I'd known. The rest of the trip, I kept my head on a swivel. I didn't sleep much. I listened for every snap of brush, every footstep. My hands were raw from gripping rocks and branches too tight. We didn't see them again, the baboons, but we saw signs, scat in dry riverbeds, broken branches high up, a half-eaten antelope carcass near a slope, picked clean except for the spine. My friends weren't sure if that was baboons or something else. I didn't ask. On the last night before we hiked out to the road where we'd get picked up, we set up camp behind a large rock formation with only one entrance point. It gave us some protection, a natural bottleneck in case anything came near. We made a small fire with dry wood and ate quietly. My nerves were shot. I kept my shoes on all night, ready to move. That's not like me. Just before sunrise, I saw one of the big males again. He was standing on a ridge maybe 50 yards off, silhouetted against the sky. His shape was clear. Broad shoulders, long limbs, still as stone. He watched us for maybe 5 minutes, unmoving. Then he turned and walked away. I didn't feel relief. I felt like we'd been tested and had barely passed. When we finally made it to the road and the truck picked us up, I sat in the back and didn't say much. My legs were covered in scratches. My pack stank like fear. And the mace can, well, I kept it. Not because it worked, but as a reminder. Later, when we were back in town, I told someone what happened. A guy who ran a gear shop. He just laughed and said, "Mace? For baboons? That's brave." My friends were local, grew up around this stuff. They knew better. After the trip, they told me straight. They didn't say it during the hike because it wouldn't have helped, but they'd always known mace wasn't the answer for baboons. I believe them now. These animals, these creatures, aren't stupid. They've lived around humans forever. They've figured us out. They know what to fear and what to ignore. And if you catch the wrong one on the wrong day, and you're carrying the wrong thing, you're not in control anymore. I still hike, still camp, but I don't carry mace. Not because I think it's worthless, but because it's not the kind of tool that works everywhere. Especially not out there, where survival has different rules. You learn quickly which of your ideas came from TV and which come from sweat and silence and watching something out there that doesn't care what you're holding in your hand.